end up going anywhere. But it was a very important step, I think, to sort of close the short stories and the smaller projects that I had been working on and open a new document and write Untitled, a novel by Alison Fairbrother. And like that, that gave me kind of a sense of purpose. Like, even though that novel didn't end up being the novel that I published, it was a big step. I mean, there's a huge difference, I think, in being short form versus trying to write a novel. And when you're in graduate school, I think the classes, the workshops, they're better tailored for writing short pieces. So I became, I thought, much more fluent in that kind of short form language, but then writing a novel was definitely its own challenge and took many, many years, even beyond when I graduated.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to the value of teaching undergrads because I'm in my first semester of doing that right now, and figuring out how to deconstruct things in a certain way and explain it to somebody, so helpful in your own creative process, definitely. I would also like to hear about how your experience in journalism has affected your creative writing. Do you find yourself kind of, picking up things that you learned in that field and transferring them into the creative? How do those things connect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Definitely. I think my first love was always fiction, but sort of as a career, I learned to read as a journalist and as a reporter. And so that is a very different kind of reading. You're really reading for facts, and you're reading less for style. So that gave me a sort of lens on thinking about plot and about sort of ideas and what was being said, not just kind of how it was being said, I guess. Also, I think I learned a lot when I was a journalist about how to investigate a mystery. I was doing some investigative reporting at the time, and that kind of thinking about how like systematically how to approach a set of questions and then find answers to those questions, I think was really helpful. And I used a lot of those techniques in my novel, in which the character is solving, it's sort of more of an emotional mystery about her father, but it is a mystery, and she does have to sort of approach it as a journalist. She's a young journalist in the book. So yeah, I definitely, I like all writers do, I think we're little thieves, right? And so I thieved from other areas of my life, and I put a lot into the book. Yeah.
Yes, writers definitely are little thieves. Definitely. Yeah. And then now working in publishing, I'm really curious to know how seeing other people's work in that context has kind of given you maybe a different lens to look at your own work.
Definitely, I think. I mean, one problem that I had was first starting, and in some ways I still think of myself as starting, but early in the process of drafting the first book, I didn't have models of rough drafts available to me of even the most famous writers often start with really rough material, right? And how do you ever have access to that? And I think we read and we study and value the polished versions of these manuscripts, but actually, it completely obscures the huge amount of toil, physical toil, but also emotional and intellectual labor and drafts and work with an editor or work with close readers, all of which goes into creating the finished product. So working in book publishing as an editor gives me access to really early drafts of things that it's very inspiring, and it's a great window into how the mind works, and it works differently for everyone. I mean, some writers, you know this, but I can tell you from my personal experience that it's really true. Some writers perfect one chapter and then sort of lay out the rest of the book, and they will not share until they feel like they have something in those early chapters, and other writers will just splash themselves out over the page, and then kind of think about reining it in and creating plot. And those are just two examples. I mean, it's really voluminous how many different kinds of ways there are to be a writer. And that's also, I think, deeply inspiring.
I think, it must be so valuable to be able to see the revision process on this larger scale. It can be disheartening to only just see the finished product so often, and thinking about all the work that the writer puts in, is the writer, then seeing other people's finished product only, that definitely kind of obscures the process, like you said. So yeah, definitely really interesting. And one more from me before we open it up. I would just like to know what your novel drafting process was, since you started in short form primarily. I'm interested to how you transitioned into the novel and what your drafts looked like.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I mentioned that I started a different novel, and I really thought, because I had written, Untitled, a novel, Alison Fairbrother, on a title page, that that was going to be the novel that I turned into my thesis, and that, and I felt that I was sort of beating it, it somehow wasn't alive, and I sort of knew that, but I kept turning in chapters anyway in workshops, because I was like, but I wrote the title page, this is, and I have this idea, and this is going to be my book. And I was out, this is really getting into the nitty gritty of my process, but I was frustrated with the script, and I went out a walk, and I was listening to Nina Simone, who's an artist that I love, and she has this song called, it's like a cover of a Bob Dylan song, I Shall Be Released. And the version that came up on my Pandora, I don't know if you guys remember Pandora, but it was big. But it said you saw what you weren't expecting, right? So it came up in my queue, and it was a version of Nina Simone's cover of the Bob Dylan song that I'd never heard before, in which there was some studio patter with her musicians ahead of take. And they started, and then she kind of stopped her musicians, and she was, you're pushing. She was, don't do anything without the feeling. And I remember I was on a walk, it stirred me to tears, because I was I've definitely been pushing, this project that just isn't working. So I went home, I was well, what do I feeling about? Right. And then I started writing book. And it turned into The Catch. And the very first early chapters of it, I turned in as my thesis. So if you want to see some real rough and ready material, you can go to the Stony Southampton campus, and you can look. I think it's bound, in the office. You can see it's this really early version that had some sparkles of something, but was so far from what it became. I mean, it took me years and years of revision to get it to the stage where it could be published. So,
well, that Nina Simone story, that's just one of the things that you remember the rest of your life. Don't start without the feeling. That's a great quote. Yeah. All right. So I'd like to turn it to the audience. Anybody has any questions for Allison? We'd love to hear them. Yeah.
Hi. Had you written fiction before you started the program?
I'd never published any fiction. I'd written stories and poems, but no, I published any fiction.
And what made you want to, what was your inspiration? Why did you want to take the fiction? Why did you enroll in the fiction program?
Yeah. Thank you. I always wanted to be a writer of fiction, and I wrote stories my whole life. And I thought that journalism is a way to be a writer, but to make money. Ha ha ha. And I loved being a journalist, but it never felt like me. It felt like I had been sort of striving for this thing that I wasn't fully passionate about. And so I decided that what I was really passionate about was writing stories. It's been that way. So I was like, what if I went to MFA school and like just got a few years as I dedicated myself to this, what would happen? So, I didn't think I could. And it took me, some years of being in a different profession to like really decide that I wanted to go back and take it seriously. So I'm so full because I think without the MFA experience, I wouldn't have sort of pushed myself on my own, I think. Yeah.
So, yes.
Like one of the luxuries of being in an MFA program is that you have all this peers and feedback and also time to work writing. And so how did you feel transitioning out of the program and trying to maintain that sort of productive, making sure you're writing all the time and getting the necessary feedback that you need to continue to progress as a writer?
Yeah, I think live in capitalism, never get a job, and don't have any friends. Like that's really no. People always ask me in book publishing because book publishing is sort of known to be a very demanding profession, and so a lot of my peers in book publishing are like, "How did you do it?" And I'm always like, "Have you tried having friends?" Really, no, it's totally a joke. But I guess I will say you have to. In my experience, I have had to be so careful with commit to like outside of my writing life because I have a demanding job. I have a partner. I have some friends, but like I can't sort of take on anything outside of that. So it's a sacrifice. But I think at least for me, it mostly some of the time a little bit feels worth it. It's really, really hard to have a full-time job and to be a writer. Right now, for example, I'm dealing with it myself because I'm trying to think like, how am I going to write another book like that? I'd spent 6 years writing that book, and now people are like, "What's next?" And I'm like, can I please take a minute? But so I've just recently decided I'm going to do 500 words a day. I don't know like how I came up with that or if it's going to work but I will say that the expectation is helping me to find the time to sit down. So I had friends and amazingly talented writers who did go through our program and haven't sort of found the time to publish since. And it's very easy, I think, when you're not in an MFA program to like let life overtake you. I mean, my friends have children and they have jobs and they have, careers and friends. And so I think I'm struggling with it too, but the daily word count, I think, is being me. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that's what I'm doing now. If you guys want to be my accountability buddies,
Yeah, to add on to that, I'm wondering if you found any extracurricular like writing groups, or if you have just been relying on friends and family to be your readers. Like where are you getting your feedback from?
I met readers in this very program who are still my readers, and I read their work. And, I think one valuable piece of advice I got during my tenure was that like not everyone is going to be a reader for everyone. And so I think kind of figuring out who shares a certain sensibility. And I think through workshopping and through taking classes, you can often sort of figure out who is writing into a style or a voice or a set of ideas that interest you and that feel kind of compatible. But I also have a really great writer friend of mine who writes in a completely different genre, but I know she like knows what I know that she can sort of see beyond what's on the page and see what I'm trying to do. And not every reader, I think, could do that for me in particular, nor could any editor do it for everyone. That's why, even there are so many different types of editors, right? In my working life, I see how different editorial approaches and strategies and how editors respond to certain works of others. The same with agents, So, but I like highly, believe in that writing is best done in a community. I mean, you have to spend a lot of like solitary your desk, but I don't think it's possible to produce great art unless you have great readers or a great editor or one great reader, someone who can sort of help you bring that idea to fruition. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So important. Yeah.
Speaking of like good feedback and such, you mentioned that the thesis is wildly different from the published book. Did you have was it just a steady 6 years of revision, or did you have any sort of like Nina Simone-esque watershed moments or like feedback from other people like drastically change vision, or was just like straight ahead, I know what I'm working towards?
You for doing this important microphone handling. Yeah, I had so many stops and starts and ups and downs, and like any creative process, I was like, I'm done with this manuscript, and then I moved it from my desktop to my deep documents folder and then moved it back the next day. And it was definitely a process. And I also got an agent and got an editor before I finished the book. So I had the fortune of working on it pretty intensively with professionals. And that was really helpful, but they couldn't do it for me. My editor would send these beautiful editorial letters. And because I'm on the other side of that process, I know how valuable an editorial can be. But still, I was stunned because she'd write these incredible letters and I'd read them and I'd be like, that's so good. How does she expect me to do that? I don't know how to do that, Or I'd read it and be like, why didn't she just tell me what to do? She just point out the problems, But of course, that's the thing, is as a writer, as an artist, nobody can sort of solve these ultimately but you. And so it took a lot of time, a lot of dedication, and it did help having those early readers and then that professional accountability and encouragement. Yeah.
Thank you. Good question. Who else has a question in here? Yeah.
Take classes outside of fiction writing while you were in the program, and how did they impact your writing process?
I did. I took a memoir class, and I took a poetry class, and I took a flash fiction and a prose poetry. It was flash fiction it was flash fiction dash prose tree. And getting to work in those different forms I thought was so helpful, because in some classes I was focusing on thinking at the level of a sentence or a stanza, right? And in others I was thinking about plot. So I really think taking classes, that was one of the reasons I chose Stony Brook, was because I felt like so many other programs kind of force you into a certain genre, and I loved that we had this opportunity to sort of play. And I think for me, it was very helpful. I also think it meant that I didn't emerge with a draft of a novel, because I didn't just sit around taking novel classes for 2.5 or 3 years. But it gave me the opportunity to read in some such widely different realms. And I think that was really invaluable. Yeah. I hope you're all taking different sorts of classes. I recommend it. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other questions in the room? Yes.
As an editor and a writer, how do you find the division you're writing your own work? Do you have your kind of editor hat on when you're writing? And how kind of take that off or utilize that with your own work?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Great question. Well, I'm struggling with it right now, to be honest. I'm hypercritical of everything because I live so much in that editor hat. I think one of the things I'm trying to find my way back to is this sense of freedom and play that I think one needs in order to start a project. But I have not found it yet. So I do think it's been a challenge to like wear those hats. With my last book, it was really helpful because I could see problems that just I sometimes felt like I could like zoom out a little bit of my own work and use some of those skills. But I do think it is somewhat hampering the new project. But let's talk in 6 months. I'm hoping to like swim through some of this and like come out the other side. We'll see. Yeah. Anyone else have?
I always like wonder about like writing a novel seems like once again, it took you 6 years. Like it's such a huge endeavor. It's like, how do you choose which idea to really like lean into and invest all that time in, especially when you don't know if anything's going to ultimately come of it?
Yeah.
I'm also wondering.
I think that no one can really answer that, I think, but I think, at least for me with the first book, I started a whole other book that was the wrong thing, right? And it took me really thinking about what was obsessing me. And in my care was something that was obsessing me in my personal life. And that was like a daughter coming to terms with like a complicated narcissistic father figure after he's dead. And I was sort of obsessed with that time of life in the early 20s when you're kind of out on your own for the first time, potentially living, maybe with roommates, away from family. And that time of life is so much about the future. And then to be in grief over a parental figure, to be sort of thrown into the past and into this like complex laboratory of feelings about the past. And so that really interested me. And it obsessed me. And I was like, as soon as I started writing that, I like the heat. So I kept going through all the times I didn't feel the heat because I was like, there's something, right now I say I'm in a very, very place where I'm waiting for the thing that's gonna urge to obsess me. So I have like 3-4 projects that I like, I like actually toggle back and forth, and I'm waiting for, I'm making small little drips and drabs of progress on each, and I'm kind of waiting to see if one is going to take over. I'm just trusting that it will.
It seems like a of it's a combination of, putting the work in and sitting down and writing 50 words a day, and also just kind of letting things happen, which that's the frustrating part is the waiting, but both equally important. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I always wind up obsessing over like what point of view I want to tell a certain story from. Is your novel always in first person, or do you ever like experiment with different points of view, or would always have like a very specific piece that the story was being told by? That's like 4 questions.
No, that's great. No, it's great. I understand. I got you. Yeah. And to be honest, the entire time I was writing The Catch, I had this other I've like never said this to anyone, so it feels weird that I'm into a room full of strangers. But I had this other novel that I called like my shadow novel in my mind, which is like the same topic, but this very kind of like pared down, spare, poetic version of it. And I was really keeping that shadow alive for a long time because I think, as you say, it's sometimes hard to figure out like what is the stylistic approach that's best, what is the point of view that ends up working. And there was a point in writing revising The Catch where the shadow novel, I stopped thinking about it, and so I think was a turning point. But I'm only realizing this now as I'm saying it to you, so I haven't I hope it's making sense. It was an important part of the process to like sort of write more poetic way that I didn't think anyone could ever read as a novel, because it didn't have plot, and it didn't have like character arcs and like all these things that we come to expect from novels. But I would say, like, keep trying until you really hit thing. One thing that really helped me when I was starting my novel, and I thought, never finish this novel, I'll figure out, like, get it right, was I'm a big fan of the writer Zadie Smith. And I read about my favorite, I think her best book is called On Beauty, but it's like a lesser known book, first season. But I reading about her process with On Beauty, and she said that she spent, like, I can't remember, something like a year and a half just getting the tone of the first few pages right. And as soon as she it took her that long, and then the rest of the novel came to her quickly. Not like Ishiguro quickly, but like in a year or something. So that gave me a lot of hope, because I was like, you're still working on the project, even if you're not, the page count isn't growing, or yeah.
Yeah, so helpful to think about, even if you're not like actively like write more and more, like it's all work. Just thinking about it is work. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, don't be sorry.
I'm curious, did you do was there, I don't know, I mean, I heard what you read, but I don't know what the rest of the novel, was there research involved, or was this all just like internal process?
Yes, there was research, but it was the kind of research that I think goes into a lot of novels that are set different time period or in a different milieu or something. I mean, it's set in Washington, D.C. during the Obama years. The main is a journalist, and that was my experience as well. So I drew on a lot of like DC culture. And I also was an investigative environmental journalist, and there's sort of this professional mystery that the character is solving, environmental mystery, at the same time that she's solving this sort of emotional, personal mystery. So I did end up using a lot of material that I stole, to use that metaphor again, from my days as a journalist. And I think the best writing does that. I mean, takes from everything. And DC is also like such a weird, interesting place, and there's not a ton of contemporary fiction set there. So it gave me a kind of edge to be thinking about like how to sort of understand that world and then put it on the page for people who might not be as familiar with that place. A lot of fiction is set in New York for some reason, so I don't really know why. So yeah, I think the research was like targeted and specific. The emotional experience of the character's journey took me, 30 some years to like grapple with, and that also is a sort of research, right? But yeah. Here, I'll just get up here.
Do you think, does your experience as being an editor and knowing what the publishing space and audience kind of looks for influence your process when you were writing the novel? Like, has it ever kept you from, say, pursuing writing that could be more experimental? Like, for example, the shadow novel that you were writing that was more poetic, was the reason you pursued it in this format partly because of what works in the industry, or was it just a decision you eventually made based on the writing?
Thank you. That's such a phenomenal question. I think probably there.
It's dead.
Okay. I'm just gonna talk.
We'll go back.
Yeah, it's such a phenomenal question. I think probably on a certain level, yes. But I also think that there's probably a good reason why I needed sort of more than like the spareness of poetry in order to tell the story that I ultimately really want to tell, and to sort of explore the ideas that I wanted to explore. And the shadow novel helped me get a lot of the feelings down. But in terms of if I'm thinking about how to, like, I would say there's sort of maybe some pops of like satire in my book. There's sort of like a little bit of mystery, sort of other like elements that I was playing with that I don't think the shadow novel could have worked as well. But I personally would always advise writers to not worry about the market when you're starting a project. That's like, to me, that's the role of the agent and editor, and that's their purview, and they know exactly how to market books and how to sell them and how to bring them to the marketplace. And I think it's like very crippling to a writer. You sort of start imposing that onto your creative process. I think also that, you know, it takes many years to write a novel. Most of the time, I mean, I hope for all of you that you will write novels in 6 books, but most likely it will take like a long time. And the marketplace changes, right? So things that are working now or selling a lot now might be what's selling in 3 years when you are all ready to bring your books to agents and editors. So it's not a great idea to try to like game the system or think what is more commercial. That's actually like my job. That's the job of the people who do this professionally. And I think it would be like a terrible mistake to sort of think like, how can I write a commercial novel or how to write like a saleable novel. Once you get together with an agent or an editor, they can help. If they say this is in X, Y, and Z way, we can't sell this novel because of this, they offer you their best counsel, right? But that's, I think, for much further down in the process than like these playful, creative drafts. Yeah, great question though. Wow, it's a question about constants. Yeah. Anything else? If you have a question about being like what it's like to edit or be an editor, I'm also happy to, you know, or anything, but no pressure. We can also eat pizza and yeah.
I just did. Since you edit and you, I'm interested in how you find yourself fiddling around with the river. How you elicit the best responses from your authors.
So good, such a good question. I think that the trick with writers is they're like all different beasts, you know? So like what really works with one writer, like do not work with another writer. And like everybody's creative process is different. So part of being an editor is kind of being like a therapist and sort of sussing out what is needed. Some writers get so stuck on plot and they just want an editor to come in and like kind of handhold them through drafting or adding a plot. And other writers need to be told they're like the greatest writer in the entire world before they can hear criticism. And some writers are like, let's dispense with that nonsense. Just give it to me straight. You know, it's like you really have to know the person. But one thing that I love about doing the job is that I do feel like it's relational, and you get to, you know, before you acquire a novel, I mean, I'm speaking novels because that's mostly what I work on. Before an editor acquires a book, most often they like have a meeting with the writer. You know, they sort of have a call or they have a Zoom kind of see whether it's a good fit. And editors sometimes turn down projects that they loved the idea of or they loved the book because they just sensed that the writer wasn't on the same wavelength in terms of their editorial vision for the book, and that's fine. Like, because there's all kinds of different writers in the world and all kinds of different editors. But it is, now that I've been in publishing for like 4.5 years, some writers that I've started with are now like show their second book. Like I'm starting to see that they and I could have like a long-term relationship in which the writer grows book to book. And, you know, it's like the editorial relationship is a very long conversation. So you want to you want it to someone that you're really excited about, not just excited by the particular thing they're working on at the time, but excited by their prospect and their sort of vision and their overarching vision that's more than just like the individual project they're working on at the time. But I have made a lot of mistakes, I think, in sort of, well, it really worked when I did it this way with this, so let me do that same thing. And then that writer is like, but why didn't you call me? And I was like, oh no, because I thought that you wanted to read my editorial letter first. You know, like so that's like also a very, very important part of the job that people don't talk about. But yeah.
Anything else?
Do you want to tell me what you're working on? Like, are you fiction writers? No, I'm curious.
I think a lot of the room is fiction.
Okay.
But there are definitely some poetry. I don't know, everybody's, you know, a lot of us are in classes together, so there are a lot of incredible fiction writers in these classes. So yeah, it's really an honor and a pleasure to get to work with all my classmates, and definitely gain a lot of really valuable insight from this conversation.
Okay.
That I'm happy to bring to my class here and talk about later with them. So yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
My great pleasure. I will be sticking around to eat a piece of that if anyone wants to get in an extra question. So.
Yes, and I encourage everyone to have out the snacks and the drinks. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to Allison again.